If you remember, when we first met, I told you that St. Nicholas saved my life. Well, now, it's time for me to tell you my story. We should have been celebrating. My oldest sister, Doria, was about to come of age. But there was no music, no dancing, no crowd gathered at our house. The mood was somber as Doria gave us her final instructions for the running of the household. I tried to cheer her up, but her eyes stayed dull. Doria was the clever one. She could do anything. She could iron with one hand and cook masterpiece dinners with the other. She'd even won prizes for her weaving. But no matter how talented she was, with no money for a dowry, there was no way for father to marry her off. The day had started with an insistent knock on the door. I would know that knock anywhere. Malchus. At just the sound of his name, people's faces would pitch up into a scowl. Kids would hide behind trees and throw rocks at him as he went down the street. Malchus was at the door, offering father a price. Whether any of us liked it or not, Doria was to be sold as a servant and would never have a husband or family of her own. Father had no choice. He had no money to look after her, and she was now of age. It hadn't always been like this. Father had been a rich man, well known for his generosity. But when Mother died, a piece of him went with her. I watched the brightness in his eyes fade more and more each day. And with it, so did our money and Doria's dreams of marriage. But I hung on to the sparkle. It was silly, I know. I was the youngest. And if we couldn't even get Doria married off, there wasn't much hope for my other sister, Lysandra. Never mind me. Lysandra? Oh, Lysandra. My middle sister was so beautiful. Not only did she turn heads as she went down to the market, but she could sing with a voice that went far beyond her beauty. As for me, well, my name Kallista was a gift from my mother. And I knew it meant beautiful. But I was neither the clever one or the beautiful one. And with two sisters ahead of me, there was no hope. But I hoped anyway. My unreasonable hope, a hope that no matter how bad things got, it could always change, came from Mother. Mother would read me stories. At night before bed, during the day between chores, any chance she could get. She told me stories of fairy tales and far-off lands. My favorite was the Christmas story, because more than any other I'd heard before, on the night that he came, everything changed. The world was never the same again. And that gave me hope that in a moment, in just one moment, everything could change. The house grew quieter and quieter as Doria ran out of instructions, and we finished our washing. We hung our stockings by the dimming fire to dry, and then one by one, we went to bed. The next morning, I went downstairs, expecting Doria to be up by the fire cooking breakfast. But she and Father were sitting at the kitchen table. At first, I couldn't figure out what was going on. And then I saw. Their eyes had this new light in them. And I knew something amazing had happened. Father held out his hand. He had the most glittering gold bag I had ever seen, bulging from the coins inside. More than enough for a dowry, and plenty for Doria to begin her new life. She had found it that morning, waiting in one of her stockings. We didn't know how it got there, but however it came, Doria's life would never be the same. So 1 year later, Doria was sorted. She had a husband and a family of her own to look after, and a new baby. But the excitement was fading as Lyssandra's coming of age was approaching. The knock at the door came again. Malchus. Again, he offered father a price. That whole day, Lysandra hid in her room and would not come out. The house was normally filled with her song, but there was no sound coming from the other side of that door. Over the last year, she'd had her eye on a fella. I saw the looks that passed between them when they thought no one was looking. She said it would never happen now, but I wasn't so sure. Remember what happened to Doria? I told her. But there was no convincing her. That night, I left father by the fire. He said he'd be up in a bit, but I knew what he was doing. I didn't say anything, though. I just simply went to bed with a smile. For hours, I forced my eyelids to stay open, hoping for a joyful shout from father. But nothing came. At the first glimmers of dawn, I finally fell asleep, my eyelids and my heart heavy, thinking, maybe Doria was right. The next thing I remember, as I jumped up at the sound of father thumping and hollering downstairs, what terrible thing had happened, I wondered. I threw up my nightgown and ran downstairs. Father was holding a bag in his hands. He had just woken up to find the second miracle in Lysandra's stocking. Lysandra was married to her fella, a merchant, a few months later. They moved to another city, and Doria had her own family and 2 kids to look after. So by the time my coming of age was approaching, 1 year later, it was just father and me. The closer the day got, the more upset father became. I may not have been as clever or as beautiful as my sisters, but I think my hope reminded him of mother. He would have me tell stories, mother's stories by the fire each night. He didn't say much, but I think he didn't believe the miracle could happen a third time. We'd already been given so much already. Could it happen again, he wondered? After a while, I started to wonder too. After all, I wasn't as clever or as beautiful. And whoever rescued my sisters, why would they care about me? That night, we sat by the fire. We didn't say much. We just took in the last few moments together. And the one thing, when we woke up this next day, the one thing we discovered was that Malchus's arrival was certain. But it didn't come when we expected. 2 days before my coming of age, there was a knock at the door. I would know that knock anywhere. Malchus. Malchus? Why now? He said times were tough and he couldn't wait. It was tomorrow or never. I think he didn't want to miss out like he did the last 2 times. Father tried to make him wait another day. But in the end, he had no choice. He had no money to look after me, and he couldn't miss this opportunity. A sad darkness swept over his eyes, like nothing I'd ever seen before. Even if the miracle giver was planning to come now, it would be too late. Father and I discussed our options, but in the end, we decided I would face my fate with a smile. No matter what happened, nothing could take Mother's stories from me. So on that night, we sat up and we talked. But eventually, I must have fallen asleep. Because the next thing I remembered was I woke up to pitch blackness and a stranger's voice outside. Then a few moments later, I heard Father's voice. Then he came inside. Setting his oil lamp aside, he embraced me tight. I'll never forget the intensity of the impression he left on my arms as he held me tight. With a tear forming at the edge of his eyes, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the coins. The coins had come just in time. He said he had seen the coins fall through the opening in the roof where the fire was, and they landed in the stocking. So he grabbed the coins and ran outside to find the Mr. Giver. He couldn't tell me much about him, though. Said he'd given his word. So I never knew. Who was this person? Was he a man? Or was he an angel? It was many years later, and I was married to my beloved Demetrius with 5 beautiful children. When Father came to the house with a strange expression on his face. He said he had some sad news. But before he would tell me what it was, he said, I know you remember the night your dowry came. Yes, I said. And how I couldn't tell you anything, even the name of the man. Yes. Do you remember Bishop Nicholas? Oh, the sweet little guy. Yes, I vaguely remember him, I said. I've seen him in the market a few times, but we never spoke. It was him. It was Nicholas. I just stood there confused, trying to picture his face, trying to figure out how and why. Father continued on. He made me promise not to tell anyone that it was him while he was alive. But now I can tell you, it was him. For years, I still wondered, who was this man? Was he a man? Or was he an angel in disguise? I never knew. But what I did know was this. Mother's stories were right. Anything can happen. Yes.